me to send a picture of myself, and I thought, I'm usually the one taking the pictures, not having pictures taken of me, but for the adults in the room, and maybe some of the students will recognize the Richard Simmons look-alike. I was at a back to the 80s or something, or ran into a man who was attending a back to the 80s event. So, my name is Debbie Granger, and as Ellen mentioned, I work with the Orange County Department of Education, about 10 minutes away from here, and it has been my honor and privilege to be in some small way involved with the GlobalConnect program during the last 10 years. And I'm curious for our folks in the room this morning, how many of you have been on the UCI campus before? Okay, so we've got some folks who are here for the first time, so welcome to UC Irvine. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time sharing with you this morning about how GlobalConnect fits with the 21st century classroom. And we're in this new world for students who are in K-12 education right now. There are things that are going on in your school lives that you may have heard some of the buzzwords around. Some of you may not have heard them, but we're going to talk a little bit about why GlobalConnect works and why it's so important today. And you will see that there are a lot of questions that we should be asking all the time, like, why do we care what happens in Greece? Why does it matter whether the Eurozone is successful or not? Why do we care about Syria? And most of the time, in high schools, these are the kinds of questions that aren't addressed because they're not in the prescribed set of standards that students are expected to learn in their history, social science classes. And that would probably be the most likely place where students would learn these kinds of things. GlobalConnect fills a gap by providing a present-day, relevant approach to what's going on in the world that also allows you to take a peek back, and you can go back and address our history, social science standards that way. I want you to take a look at this, and I'm hoping that you will have a conversation with the folks around you. If you were confronted with something like this today, what would you need to know? What are some of the many things you would need to know to make sense out of this? Will you talk to the folks around you and look closely? There's a lot of detail on it. Spend a couple of minutes talking to the people around you and think about what you need to know to make sense out of this map titled The Arab Spring. And I'll be quiet and let you chat with each other. What might be some of the things that you would need to know? And we'll talk about questions that you might have also in just a moment. But what might be some of the things that you would need to know to make sense out of this?
And no, definitely current events and some historical events too.
a combination of current and historical events. Thank you. What else? Yes.
For example, the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, so that's why it's called the Big Bang.
Thank you. Okay, so being able to connect the name of this map and the notion of the Arab Spring with its genesis. Thank you. Yes.
Geography.
Yeah, you know geography. I'm going to just flash to another map for a moment and come right back to this one. So, if you're in a class and you're learning geography of the Middle East, which do you think would be a more engaging approach? To start with this and begin doing some memorization, or perhaps to start with something like this?
Well, there's no question.
One of the things that struck me as I was looking at this was, I was going, oh shoot, you know, I don't remember with Yemen and Oman, I couldn't remember which one was where, so I had to like go back and forth and compare the two. So I ended up spending some time comparing these as I was getting ready for today. And so what are some other things that you might need to know in order to tackle something like this and to try to make sense out of it?
You need to know some pop culture. Myth over there and the board.
Yeah. So who knows what the board is a reference to? Yes. And what about who are the board?
They're like that. They're like one of the not in the Klingons. They're like one of the evil races of Star Trek.
They're incessant. They're evil. They're determined to take over everything, take over the universe. So yeah. So knowing some pop culture is critical. And then how about mech, the other end? And what does it mean? You gave a good jump. So yeah, great. And what's the deal with the whole Arab Yugoslavia with the evil drag queen and Bugs Bunny? It's Libya, and what does it tell us about this person's perspective on what's going on in Libya?
Yugoslavia did like 1990s.
And maybe they're going to split. Definitely polarized. So a lot of stuff going on. What did you think about Haiti up there?
Well, that's interesting because Washington, D.C. is firmly entrenched in Israel.
Okay.
And that's always been a criticism of the American government. And then Haiti, Lebanon. So then Haiti has always been kind of the big stepchild of the Caribbean and the recent earthquake and the outpouring of aid. But what's interesting is the snobs. The wealthiest who are building everything from motorcycles to race cars to...
Yep. So lot going on here, and I thought that this might be a fun way to speak to some of the things that GlobalConnect brings to classrooms. It allows students to engage in very sensitive material at times, resources that allow students to develop really deep levels of knowledge about the world, and then to be able to start to interpret this. Now, I just happened to find this on the internet, and I thought it was really interesting. It's not necessarily my opinion, but I think it's something that gives tremendous food for thought, and you have to know a lot in order to be able to look at it. And of course, there's another layer to it that I didn't mention, and that is being able to go back to sources and find out where information comes from. And that's another piece that GlobalConnect brings into the classroom, that if something is being shared with students, students are also taught to look back at the source and find out where did this come from, whose perspective is this, so they can start to look at bias and also look at multiple perspectives on things, which is part of the new world that we're in with Common Core state standards. So move forward a little bit. Something else that I think has been a really special component of the GlobalConnect program as it's played out at Sean Bolton School is the idea of connecting it with world languages. And it's difficult to understand other places in the world if you don't understand their cultures. And one of the vehicles for understanding culture is learning language. And these happen to be languages related to business. And we know that outside of English, the top most spoken languages in the world of business are French, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic. Oh, and Chinese. Actually, I think Russian and Chinese have flipped spaces. This is a little bit old. But the idea of being able to connect with culture, being able to connect with language, has become another pivotal piece of the GlobalConnect program. And it's something that I think is going to be part of its mark as it moves forward. A little bit of data that I wanted to share with you, and it speaks to why GlobalConnect matters. And when Dr. Petraka opened the session this morning, he talked a little bit about why GlobalConnect. And back when GlobalConnect began, when Ellen hatched this amazing scheme and Dr. Sevaceres was involved, the idea was that UC Irvine's School of Social Sciences could provide a form of outreach so that more students would be college ready. And they would be able to come into the UC system and not only be admitted, but then be successful once they got here. And that was part of the genesis of the program. And there are some, in my opinion, alarming and kind of sad data around high school graduation levels, as well as Cal State and UC admissions. And some of you may be familiar with these data. For some of you, these may be new. These are a couple years old, but you'll see that the graduating class of 2010, out of them, about 41% of white students in Orange County were ready to go on to UC or a CSU campus. About 20% of Hispanic or Latino students were ready to go on. So about half were ready, of those were ready to go on. And the percentage really, even of white students, wasn't especially high if white students are considered the benchmark. We also see that graduation levels are pretty flat and haven't increased dramatically over the last 10 years. We also know that there's something called an English language gap. And there's been a big push nationally to see this yellow line join up, have a real steep growth curve, and match up with the red line. And for both of those, then to continue going up and up. And we're not seeing that happen. With all of the best efforts in the last 10 years or so with No Child Left Behind, there have been tremendous efforts to help students become proficient with reading, writing, listening, and speaking in English. And those efforts haven't paid off the way that we had hoped that they would. And programs like GlobalConnect that require students to develop their academic English, to become really strong readers, really strong writers. And when I say strong readers, they have to read what's referred to as expository text. You're reading nonfiction stuff. You're not reading, Huckleberry Finn, which is also important. Literature is really important. And reading nonfiction text is also critical. So be able to read expository text and then to be able to write, develop things like PowerPoint presentations, to be able to speak, creates students who are analytical, who are able to synthesize their ideas and express them effectively, which you need to do when you go to college and when you move on into whatever your professional life is going to be later on. This just shows us that in Orange County, only 36.2% of students that go on to UC or Cal State need no remediation. They don't need bonehead English and that kind of stuff. Most of the students, the vast majority of students that go on to a UC or a Cal State need help when they get there because they are not ready to read, write, and compute usually at the university level. GlobalConnect addresses this. Again, because of the type of reading the students do and the expectations for communication, GlobalConnect students are the ones who are the outliers. They're not within that 36.2% eligibility. Some other data that we know, and these are all Orange County items. for every 20 ninth graders, so for every 20 high school freshmen, we know that in Orange County, 6 of them are going to drop out. Another 6 of them are going to go straight from high school into the workplace. We talked about this a little while ago, just a moment ago, that our UC and CSU eligibility rates have dropped. And that with our students who are identified as Asian, that 63% are ready to go on to a UC or a CSU, and of them, about 37% need some kind of remediation when they get to college. With our Filipino population, about half are ready to go on, and of those, 50% need assistance when they get to college. Students identified as white, about 41% are eligible, and of those, almost 60% need assistance when they get to college. Latino students, about 20% are ready to go on, and about 80% of them need assistance once they get to college. And those assistance levels are very alarming for university professors. Every year in the fall, if you look at the op-ed pages of the local newspapers, you will see the frustrated pieces submitted by university professors about what's happening to these high school students when they come to college. These kids come to college and they don't know how to do anything. And it freaks out the professors. So GlobalConnect addresses this, because when you're working with folks from political science, from geography, from sociology, etc., where their focus is on analysis and effective communication, it drives down that need for remediation when students come to UC Irvine or any other UC school or Cal State. We know that of those 29th graders, 8 of them are going to become college freshmen. And I apologize, that's a typo and I can't get that out of that slide. 4 end up dropping out of college. 4 graduate. So from 20 high school freshmen, 4 of them will statistically graduate from college. 2 of those 4 will secure high skills, high wage occupations, and the other 2 will be underemployed. This is in Orange County. We might expect this in, I happen to do some work with some pretty high impact schools, high poverty schools in areas outside of Bakersfield. And I might expect to see things like this there. When we see it here in Orange County, it speaks to how significant this issue is and how important programs like GlobalConnect are for student learning. This question is rhetorical. The actions that we need to take to meet 21st century needs of all students include GlobalConnect. And the schools that have made the commitment to do this know that it takes work. It takes initiative on the part of the administrators that do it. It takes initiative on the part of the teachers that are involved with it. And it involves students looking at their educations a different way. And one of the most amazing parts about it is it allows high school students to connect with college students. And not only do they have the academic component of it, but they also have the benefit of all the mentorship and the idea that I think I can do that too, which is a pretty powerful notion that students may not even recognize when they're in the middle of it. So there's some features of GlobalConnect that some of you may know about, others this may be new for you. GlobalConnect says that their function is to help students learn to envision global solutions, to become agents of change in the world. It's to share knowledge, which we see when undergrads and graduate students from UC Irvine, as well as the professors, are on high school campuses interacting with high school students. That's knowledge sharing. And then high school students get to share what they learn with their GlobalConnect partners. In fact, you're going to get to see some of that today. The notion is that we need to learn to think globally. I listened to a piece on NPR yesterday about a Nigerian gentleman who moved to China. And wow, I'm trying to get my brain around things like this all the time, that we are living in a world where everything that happens everywhere else affects us here. And as students and as adults, we all need to continually think about why does Syria matter? Why does Greece matter? And GlobalConnect allows us to do that. We engage in ideas. GlobalConnect has been about creating partnerships. Everything they do, I know that when Dr. Petraka opened the session, he talked about half a shoestring. And that's a generous description. This program has been all about creating partnerships. Whether it's Ellen creating the partnerships with the amazing students here at UCI who are out on campuses, whether it's partnerships with the high schools around the area, whether it's partnerships with the Department of Ed, and I'm sure I'm missing others, but it's all about how do we work together to create the most powerful possible learning experience for students. And developing future leaders. I've had the privilege of getting to know some of the undergrads involved with the GlobalConnect program. They're all amazing. And things that you know, the initiative that you take, you enlighten teachers when you come onto their campuses. You let the students that you work with understand that there's a whole world out there that they're going to need to take by the reins and take charge of. So, 10 years is a long time. And GlobalConnect, I don't know, the vision now is, so how do we launch this for the next 10 years or the next 30 years? We know that GlobalConnect is a gem here in Orange County. And I've highlighted some of the reasons why already. It allows a variety of different people to come together on a regular basis with the notion that every high school student who is touched by this program is going to be ready to go on to college, and that they're going to be agents for change in the world, not just locally. We're in this new world now. For everybody in K-12 education, we now have new standards. We have new standards that come down the pipeline periodically, and where we are today is in the world of Common Core state standards. And you may have heard about these already. The notion was that there would be a set of national standards that could be modified a little bit for each state. They could be added onto for each of the states. So California is one of the states that has adopted Common Core, and they apply in language arts and mathematics. And you'll see here that core is an essential, irreducible set of knowledge and skills that apply to the real world. The idea is that we need to have students ready to move into their futures and be successful. And talk about that. Common Core, if done correctly, will require that students and teachers interact differently with each other, and that schools will operate a little bit differently. We'll see more interdisciplinary teaching probably, and which is different than the way that most high schools operate, where you go from your math class, to your English class, to your science class, et cetera, through your day. That instead of those silos, there's probably going to be a lot more interweaving that goes on during the day. This is what GlobalConnect has been doing for 10 years. Common Core has come into effect in the last year. This has been going on already in Orange County for 10. So because of Ellen's vision, we've been able to offer things to students. All of the students in this room right now are ahead of the game because they've been involved with GlobalConnect. Also, connected with Common Core are a set of dispositions, ways that you look at yourself, the world, and your learning, and they're referred to as habits of mind. And the idea of a habit of mind is, how are you going to deal with something that's unknown to you? And there's no easy solution. There's some dispositions, some ways that you have to look at yourself in the world in order to tackle tough problems. And these have been modified in the language arts area. They refer to them as capacities. And just a couple of them, you'll see that you need to demonstrate independence. You need to be able to figure stuff out on your own. You also have to have enough content knowledge. You have to know enough stuff to put pieces together and make sense out of complicated situations. You have to be able to comprehend and critique. You have to value evidence. You have to use technology. And you have to understand other perspectives and cultures. If this was a checklist for GlobalConnect, we could just sit there and go check, 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 all the way through. There also happen to be some mathematical practices, which I think are of interest here. GlobalConnect does not directly address mathematics, and I don't want to profess that it does. However, there are notions of perseverance, the idea of constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others, the idea of attending to precision, and to think about repetition in the world. There are things that happen over and over again, and GlobalConnect highlights those. So some of these math practices also, as in terms of habits of mind, also apply to what you're learning through GlobalConnect. GlobalConnect also bases itself in the notion of project-based learning. And you can see some of the posters over here along the wall for the presentations that are going to be coming up soon. And project-based learning is surrounded by these ideas of publicly presented products, right over here. You have a driving question or a challenge that you're addressing. So when you get to see the presentations that are going to be shared in a little while, you'll find out what was the driving question that guided those projects. Students need to know something. It has to be personally relevant. It has to answer a need for the students themselves. They have to attend to inquiry. They have to do some research. They have to be curious. And they're going to be thinking about innovation. It addresses 21st century skills, which I'll be coming to in a moment. And student has their own voice in this. So when students give their presentations, it's not going to be some little checklist where they filled in a blank that the teacher offered them where they didn't have to think about it. Instead, they were the ones who shared their opinions and their voice based on their reasoning and the evidence that they collected. Also, there's a feedback and revision process. Those interns that are at the high school campuses all the time are providing that ongoing feedback and revision with students as they're working on their projects. This is how Common Core is going to be playing out in classrooms. You're already doing it. GlobalConnect has been doing this for 10 years already. I mentioned 21st century skills. Some of the most important ones, and I know this list is itty-bitty and hard to read, but there are a couple there that I think are really valuable for you to know about. And they include in the, well, first of all, core subjects. Please note, econ, geography, history, government and civics, world languages. This is what students need to know about to be successful in the 21st century. We've just spent about 10 years where there's a heavy focus on math and science, and now people are saying, you know what, we think people need to know more than just math and science. You need to know what it means to be an ethical human being in a global society. And I have flashbacks, and I wish I could find the quotation on this. Ellen and I were at a conference a number of years ago, and it was about global education. And there was a quote that was shared about American troops in the Middle East, and how wouldn't it have been nice if we had a couple of people who could read, at least read Arabic, because they were trying to find these like Al-Qaeda training programs so they could root them out, and there were like big signs in Arabic that said like Al-Qaeda training camp, and the Americans were walking right past them and had no idea that they were right there in front of them. Literally didn't know it because we didn't have enough people who could speak Arabic to help out with this. And so sometimes you need to know a little bit more. Math and science are really important. And there are other things you also need to know as well. And those things used to be considered kind of like soft skills, and soft apparently wasn't considered important. But knowing how to interact with other people and knowing how to communicate, I think is pretty important. We also have some 21st century themes. Notice, in the 21st century world, there's an expectation that students in high school are globally aware. Aha! GlobalConnect right there. Also, the notion of financial, economic, business, and entrepreneurial literacy. GlobalConnect, the Project of Change, often touches on these notions of literacy, as well as civic and health. Sometimes Project of Change has to do with an NGO around health issues or water issues, things like that. If you were to read on, you would see that that 21st century student outcomes being affected as a 21st century student and citizen. GlobalConnect has been addressing this for 10 years already. I kind of wonder sometimes if Common Core standards were written and somebody had been watching GlobalConnect from the side, like, oh, I think we could develop our standards from this. There are 5 things that teachers are supposed to be doing now that we're in the world of Common Core state standards. They're supposed to provide students with high-level text-based discussions in classrooms. GlobalConnect does that. They're supposed to have students consider for their projects real audiences and real purposes instead of kind of like a made-up thing like pretend like you were the emperor of Mars and you were going to do whatever. Instead, this is about something that's happening on this planet today. Instead of persuading using emotion, students need to learn how to argue using logic and evidence. I'm seeing our interns going, yeah. I'm sorry about that. It didn't look like that on my computer, sorry. The idea of learning processes so that you can hang on to strategies for approaching things instead of just learning a set of facts, which are also important. You also need to learn what to do with them, and also a sense of ownership of your own learning. I imagine that every student who has developed a presentation here is going to remember this presentation. You own this. You will remember this when you're my age, and that's a long way from now. And also this notion of text complexity. Not only are students expected to use text that is more challenging, perhaps, to read than previously, but also you're supposed to read a whole lot of different kinds of perspectives. And that is not typical in a classroom where you have one textbook. You're not going to get all those different perspectives in it. GlobalConnect compels students to look at multiple perspectives and also to tackle text that they may have considered too challenging to read on their own before, but they're provided with structures and tools so they can get good at using those things, those kinds of text. I'd like to say that GlobalConnect may at one time have been considered ahead of its time. In our world of Common Core state standards, it is just in time for these reasons. That means 21st century learning skills. And with that, I hope that I've been able to drive home the point that for the last 10 years, GlobalConnect has been doing what folks are just now realizing needs to happen in classrooms. And each and every one of you involved with this program should feel that you're in a very special place involved with something that is incredibly meaningful and that will affect you for the rest of your lives and make you better people as a result. Thank you.